Everybody ready? Good to go? All right. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out to our event tonight. Actually, our final regular event of the semester, Liberalizing International and Foreign Abortion Laws in the Time of Coronavirus. My name is Dennis Haslinsky. I'm currently a sophomore here at Georgetown College and the Outreach Chair at Georgetown University's undergraduate chapter of the Federal Society. We spent months organizing this event alongside Georgetown Right to Life, so a huge thank you to them for helping us put this event together. We have two wonderful panelists here tonight. Thank you both so much for joining us. All right, so on behalf of Georgetown Federal Society, we are honored to have Mrs. Catherine Glenn Foster. Mrs. Foster serves as president and CEO of Americans United for Life, America's original national pro-life organization, the nation's premier pro-life legal team, being involved in every abortion-related case before the U.S. Supreme Court since Roe v. Wade. Under Foster's leadership, AUL pursues and refines a mother-child strategy that looks at the interests and vulnerabilities of both, protecting them from abortion industry abuses. She also earned her JD at Georgetown University Law Center, so we're very glad to have a fellow Hoya with us tonight. And on behalf of Georgetown Right to Life, it's a pleasure to have Mr. Lewis Brown. Lewis Brown serves as the executive director of Christ Medicus Foundation, a nonprofit that serves to defend life, human dignity, and religious freedom in the field of healthcare. Mr. Brown received an undergraduate degree from Michigan State University and a Juris Doctorate from Howard University School of Law, so another DC area grad with us tonight. Lewis Brown is admitted to practice law in the state of Michigan, the U.S. District Court of Michigan, and the U.S. Court of Appeals from the Sixth Circuit, where he helped establish the Catholic healthcare sharing option. In 2017, he received a political appointment and joined the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C., where he served until 2019. And our moderator here tonight for our event is Mateo Caulfield. Mateo is a sophomore in Georgetown College studying classics in government. Having worked closely with Students for Life of America, he currently serves as the vice president of Georgetown University Right to Life and was the outreach chair for the 2021 Cardinal O'Connor Conference on Life. So we're happy to have you joining us as well. So before we get started with our panel, I just want to state that the views presented by the speakers tonight are not necessarily reflective of the views of the Federal Society or any member thereof. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Mateo for our questions. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. Thank you so much for everyone, both Catherine Glenn Foster and Lewis Brown, for coming today. We're really excited to have a conversation and hear your perspectives and your thoughts on abortion issues and the law. So we're going to get started, and I just wanted to say to our audience that you can ask a question using the Q&A function. I'll sift through the questions and ask them around 8:45. So we'll start off with 45 minutes of some predetermined questions and then move on to those. And these questions, the questions I'll be asking, we'll start with some broad questions about the status of international abortion laws, and then we'll get into some more specific questions. So to begin, we're wondering, broadly speaking, what is the state of international abortion laws? How have these laws liberalized over time? And have there been any common observable accelerants of this trend across the globe? So very generally, let's start with Lewis Brown.
Sure. Thanks, Mateo, for the opportunity to be with you. And I just want to, celebrate the courage of all of you and the current environment and witnessing to your pro-life convictions and the importance of human dignity from conception to natural death. Very important. So very appreciate it. And Catherine, it's great to be with you as well. Yeah. So big fan of your work. So generally speaking, I think that when it comes to the laws of various nation states, also the movement of international institutions, and the movement of global health in general is tragically, that the immoral act of abortion has been just normalized across most of global health and in far too many countries, particularly in the West. And it's been wrongly, incorrectly, immorally, and I would argue even illegally under the natural law, it's a violation of the natural law, that abortion has been articulated as an aspect of so-called reproductive justice, when in reality, it's a grave injustice, not only to the unborn that's being murdered in the womb, but also to the pregnant mother, and to the father, and to the community and the society that's been now deprived of this life, and the unborn child that's been deprived of this life. Also, it's a very tragic movement away from the International Charter on Human Rights that was established under the United Nations, that really set out a understanding of our human rights, our fundamental human rights as people across the globe, that was largely based on the reality of the dignity of the human person. And that is a grave travesty. I think that there is a increasing understanding by nation states that recognize the importance of the dignity of the unborn and the dignity of their mothers and their fathers. There's an increasing understanding of the urgency of rejecting this throwaway culture, as Pope Francis calls it, this culture of death, and advancing this culture of life for the sake of the unborn, for the sake of the mother, for the sake of the father, for the sake of the community and the culture, but also for the sake of the promulgation of the population of that country. We're starting to see some research, and perhaps, and I'm not an expert on population statistics, but perhaps it's been showing this for a long time, that there's projections for a serious drop in the populations of certain countries, largely because they've had, very liberal, and I don't mean that in terms of conservative liberal, but just very permissive abortion structures within their legal system and their healthcare system. And that's really hurt the promulgation of their population. And so we're seeing that in some of the projections that have recently come out about where certain countries will be in population statistics. So whether someone's getting that, is getting to a place of urgency on protecting and defending the unborn and their families from a moral, ethical, or religious conviction, or someone's getting there because of the scientific reality of the life of the unborn, or someone's getting there because they're starting to see the need to just make sure that every population is replacing its population and growing and not declining. I think there's a greater sense of urgency, particularly in some countries in Europe, hopefully some countries within the global South. And so that's important. That's some of the things that I'm seeing.
Excellent. Catherine, Glenn Foster, would you like to weigh in on the same question, broadly speaking, very broadly, to start off? What is the state of international abortion laws?
Absolutely. It is an extremely broad question, and a question that we could spend hours just discussing this. My background was as an internationalist. I spent time at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies dealing with peacekeeping issues in Africa and around the world, training up civil and military defense leaders on peacekeeping issues relating to a variety of topics that affected their nations. So this is something that's been near and dear to my heart for a very long time. I spent years prior to coming to Americans United for Life surveying the world's abortion laws and suicide by physician laws and other bioethics law and policy across the globe. So I'd like to take it just very briefly, high level by region, starting with Europe. In Europe, the results are mixed. We saw in May of 2018, the Republic of Ireland decriminalizing abortion by referendum. But then in October 2020, we saw from Poland, the Constitutional Tribunal striking down an exception to a 1993 law that allowed abortion in the case of disability, and demonstrating a response that we've seen in Argentina and that we're likely to see in the US when Roe was overturned, as legal scholars on both the left and the right have predicted for decades now. We saw pro-abortion activists staging violent protests and frequently targeting churches, in fact. We saw opposition lawmakers disrupting the parliament with loud chanting and signs with slogans like "This is war" and "Legalize abortion," and blocking the majority from speaking. Turning to Asia and the Pacific, and again, this is just very high level, a couple of countries in each region. Asian Pacific abortion activists are becoming more aggressive. We see in Australia, some of the Australian states moving to expand abortion, especially chemical abortion. New Zealand embracing abortion on demand back last year. In Africa, we see tremendous opposition to normalizing abortion, especially as Christianity really grows there. Recently in Kenya, authorities arrested 10 people who were performing abortions and falsely claiming to be doctors, falsely claiming that they had any real expertise in that at all. Latin America, the scene of a lot of international agitation for abortion. And in fact, we at Americans United for Life publish the AUL Defending Life Latin America project on our website, where we have country reports and topical articles, and you can get briefings there. So a lot of different nations, and in fact, I've attended pro-abortion conferences and been able to participate in meetings where there was discussion about how to expand abortion into particularly Africa and Latin America, where they're discussing just the different tactics and strategies that they would use to undermine a nation's laws and undermine a nation's ability to self-determine what would be best and most appropriate for their moral framework and the people of their nation, what would best protect those people. So I've attended a lot of conferences along those lines. We do know that the 23 countries that signed the American Convention on Human Rights affirmed via treaty that, and this is a quote, "Every person has the right to have his life respected. This right shall be protected by law and in general from the moment of conception. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his life." And the U.S. is a signatory to that, not a party, but a signatory. We signed the convention back in '77, but never ratified it, but we've never withdrawn either. And yet, so we see this strong commitment to life in Central America and South America and in Africa in particular, but we see also attacks by international activists and NGOs continuing. CEDAW, for example, UN bodies and UN adjacent bodies. We saw in Mexico in July of 2020, the Supreme Court rejecting a push to adopt abortion on demand by judicial fiat. It concerned an effort to decriminalize the act of abortion in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. And thankfully, the justices there understood that their mandate was not to make new laws and overturn the will of the people, but that it should be a legislative matter, and that they were really called to interpret the law as it was written and commonly understood. We did also see Argentina recently become the first major Latin American country to accept legalized abortion by a very narrow legislative majority. A prior narrow defeat for the bill had resulted in wide-scale violent riots there. But we do see, again, abortion being aggressively pushed in Latin America and around the world by the Center for Reproductive Rights, the Women's Link Worldwide, CLA-DEM, the International Planned Parenthood Federation, Marie Stopes International, CEDAW, other bodies. They routinely appear before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, advocating for exceptions to abortion. But we also see that on the other side, pro-life organizations have been repeatedly denied participation in the commission's hearings. So that's a real push. We also see that DC is the seat of the Organization of American States and the International Commission on Human Rights, and is the commission's main donor. In recent years, the commission's urged countries to legalize abortion on at least 3 grounds: abortion where the child was conceived in rape, abortion of children with genetic disabilities, and in cases where the pregnancy poses a risk to the life or health of the mother. And so it goes without saying that for these advocates, the rights would go beyond decriminalization on those grounds to really unrestricted abortion and subsidies and the suppression of healthcare rights of conscience of pro-life doctors and medical professionals. We'll, I think, talk a little bit more later about the Mexico City policy and some other aspects to the U.S. and our role in international abortion and promotion. But I would just end on this with this initial question that recently we saw 33 countries representing 1.6 billion persons signing the Geneva Consensus Declaration. And that called for promoting women's health, life, and family by preserving life and respecting national sovereignty and culture. And that declaration has 4 pillars. 1, better health for women. 2, the preservation of human life. 3, strengthening of family as the foundational unit of society. And 4, protecting every nation's national sovereignty and global politics. The Declaration declares that in no case should abortion be promoted as a method of family planning, and that any measures or changes related to abortion within the health system can only be determined at the national or local level and shouldn't be imposed by abortion colonialism, abortion exports, or these international bodies. It reaffirmed that the child needs special safeguards and care before as well as after birth, and that special measures of protection and assistance should be taken on behalf of all children based on the principle of the best interest of the child.
Excellent, thank you. I'm really glad we started with that question to get a real bird's eye view of this issue. Next, we're rounding the corner of the pandemic, but our question is, how is the COVID-19 pandemic affecting abortion laws? How has it impacted the push for liberalized abortion laws? And have there been any major shifts or observable trends during the progression of the COVID-19 pandemic as it relates to abortion? We'll start with Louis again.
Sure. I think I can best speak to what's happened in the United States. I think it's been a shame how, through one of the worst public health crises in in American history, recent American history in the last 90 years, there has been an effort while we're shutting down so many things that are in reality essential. State officials have been going through extraordinary pains in some states to ensure that abortion access continues under the guise that it's healthcare. And we know that it's not healthcare. And as we've talked so much about racial disparities in the United States. We know that, abortion within civil rights language and in human rights language is the concept of disparate impact, right? And we know that abortion is a healthcare policy domestically and internationally that has a racist origin, and it continues to be a racist policy that disproportionately impacts, it shouldn't impact anybody, but disproportionately impacts those that are socially and economically disadvantaged. And so the extent to which the public health community, parts of the public health community in the United States has attempted to ensure that so many things can be shut down, but that we continue to maintain legal access to abortion. And the reality, the same thing has gone on within much of the global public health community, I think is really an uncovering and an unveiling of the reality of the ideological nature of too much of public health. And so I think in certain countries, and particularly in the United States, but in certain countries where we've seen so many things shut down, so many things restricted, so many commercial interests restricted, so many houses of worship shut down, but public health officials still going to great pains to maintain abortion access. It's shown, and particularly a procedure that ends human life and doesn't save human life. I think it's unveiling and a sobering reality that's been uncovered in the middle of COVID. That even as we're trying to save lives, people think abortion's so important that we're willing to go to great lengths to shut down certain public goods while maintaining the access of something that murders unborn children and has a disparate impact on people that are socially and economically so vulnerable. That's happening here in the United States, and it's happening around the world. I think something that's been challenging that people don't quite understand is that, and I saw this when I was at HHS, and I've seen it in other contexts, and Catherine knows this well, much of the global public health community, much, not all, but much of the global public health community and much of the apparatus of various international institutions are completely beholden to a false concept of justice that articulates something that actually murders the unborn and that harms women as justice and as necessary under all and any circumstances. and even should other public goods, other aspects of public health may be harmed, abortion must go on. And so I think that reality that we've seen has been sobering, and it has been clarifying about where certain public health officials stand on what truly is abortion and what truly is not.
Catherine, same question. How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted abortion laws and abortion restrictions, both in our country and internationally?
Sure. I would first say that the abortion industry has seized on the COVID pandemic to push for elimination of the REMS conditions on chemical abortion that protects the health and safety of women who are seeking those chemical abortion pills. And that included a requirement that that approved providers of mifeprex provide the drug directly to women. We have to remember the dangers of chemical abortion and the fact that, as we know from study after study, chemical abortion has been proven to have an increased risk of hemorrhage and an increased risk of sepsis as compared to surgical abortion. We know the harms that chemical abortion can bring to women, and we in fact track that in a number of our resources, including the unsafe resource that goes behind the doors of abortion facilities. Not us in particular, but government agencies inspecting abortion facilities and finding dirty and dangerous conditions that are putting women at risk, that are harming women, the very people that the abortion industry is claiming to serve. So it is critically important that that we follow these requirements when it comes to chemical abortion. We're talking about women's lives on the line. And until recently, the people who were trying to get these requirements struck down, they were successful in the U.S. They got a federal judge in Maryland to slap an injunction on the REMS, ostensibly covering all 50 states in the name of a constitutional right to terminate a pregnancy, and they invalidated 20 years of federal government agency policy. In January, the Supreme Court granted the government's request to reinstate the FDA rules, and they vacated the injunction and sent the case back down. But that was a situation where women in all 50 states were put at risk because of one judge in Maryland. I would also say that I'm right now here in West Virginia in a borrowed conference room here, and here in West Virginia, the state, in response to COVID, very wisely decided to protect the PPE, to protect and restrict some of these elective procedures, and said, you know what, across the board, we're going to ensure that only emergency procedures are being performed right now in very extraordinary times. And what we saw here was that they were slapped with a lawsuit just because they were trying to save people from the biggest global crisis, the biggest pandemic that we have seen in our lifetimes. So that's what the situation is here in the U.S. Internationally, we're also seeing anecdotal reports of humanitarian aid packages that include chemical abortion as a necessary component of healthcare. And a United Nations COVID resolution received a no vote from the US, which said that there is no international right to abortion, nor is there any duty on the part of states to finance or facilitate abortion. That's the first time that the US has voted against a resolution on these grounds. This isn't the first time that we've seen a crisis be used to promote abortion. We see that in wartime when it comes to wartime care, particularly for women. We know the atrocities, the war crimes that so often happen. And frequently what happens with aid packages is that organizations try to include abortion and chemical abortion in those aid packages, which is not even a Band-Aid on the wound, it's a slap in the face to what these women have gone through and survived. So we've seen that. We've seen in the wake of Katrina, situations where Planned Parenthood and other entities were offering birth control pills and chemical abortion pills with different hurricanes and other climate crisis kind of events. where they were just saying, okay, no driver's license needed, just come show up at our clinic and we'll provide you with whatever you need. So, so it's not the first time that we've seen this, but we have faced just unprecedented times in this past year. And to see the abortion industry and abortion activists warp the true public health need into an opportunity yet again to promote abortion has been disheartening, to say the least.
And I'd like to add on that. I think it shows what so many of us know is that there's a greater concern for financial advantage. There's a greater concern for the commoditization of women than a concern about the health of women, a concern about the needs of women, and concern about the integrative health of women, particularly in those crisis situations where women are already going under extraordinary trauma and duress. Someone close to me just returned from Cameroon about a week and a half ago to provide mental health training to folks in Cameroon who are going through, a challenging time with the civil war in parts of the country, and to take a situation where you have patients that are under duress, under trauma, and even in those situations, you can argue COVID-19, not to the same extent, but it's a trauma for our country, and to make that person a commodity and to sacrifice their whole health just to make a buck. It shows the reality of what we're talking about. It's not justice that we're talking about. It's injustice. It's not a concern about the rights and dignity and health of women. It's a concern for the pocketbook of these entities that are providing these services. And so again, that's some of as painful as this last year has been on these issues, that's some of the clarity and the truth that we're getting in these crisis situations.
Exactly right, Louis.
Excellent. Well, great. Those are our two general questions. For right now, we're going to move into some of more specific questions, but you'll find that there's still so much you can dissect in the specific questions. The first one has to do with international institutions, which both of you have covered a little bit already. But we want to know what is the role of major international bodies like the UN and how do they play on this legal trend? Does the UN have an official stance on abortion, and how much power do they have in a nation's abortion laws? We'll start with Louis again.
Yeah, I think Catherine would be the expert on this one, but I'm happy to give my perspective. I think we're in a challenging time on this, and I'll try to take a larger historical viewpoint. The United Nations, and by way of example, the European Union, which I've studied a fair amount, I believe were both created as largely, not entirely, and maybe not even largely, but at least in part as holy projects. We'd gone through a extraordinarily challenging first half of the 20th century. A lot of the bloodshed that happened in the 20th century continued even after the United Nations was founded in San Francisco, particularly with communist regimes and the millions upon millions that were killed by the Chinese Communist Party and the millions that were killed by the Communist Party in Russia. But part of the founding of the UN was a response to say, look, we've had too much war, we've had too much bloodshed. We need to create a greater international community, particularly amongst the allies that won World War II. And we also need to make more concrete the reality of human dignity and the human rights of our peoples in our nation state. The same thing with the European Union. Much of the march of the European Union was a desire to get away from, 2 wars in less than 30 years that killed millions upon millions of Europeans, and to create a greater international community amongst, particularly when you look at the situation between Germany and France, and to create peace, to allow peace to foment, and harmony and unity to foment. And I think a lot of that was great. And a lot of that still is great. I think good has been done through some of that. But I think there's a high stakes game being played out right now on whether nation states, particularly within Western Europe, with countries that have some affiliation with the European Union, as to whether these nation states will maintain their sovereignty or not. Years ago, and this is a long time ago, but I did some research and just came to the theory that the move to the euro, the common currency, was the beginning of the creation of something approaching the United States of Europe. And I think on a certain level, that's what we're seeing. That's not, it's great to have international institutions act together in cooperation, but that sovereignty of the nation state is important to maintaining human freedom. It's important to the political participation of their peoples, and particularly for countries like Poland, like Hungary, some of the other countries that have a proper understanding of human dignity and the value of the unborn. It's important that their people be able to engage in self-government, be able to consent to being governed properly. And in those countries and in other countries, even outside of Western Europe, it's vital to them being able to protect and defend the right to life. Because sadly, too many of our international institutions are aspects of our international institutions are largely too captive to a throwaway culture. And if nation states functionally lose their sovereignty, start being governed by international juridical bodies, I think it's very dangerous to human freedom in general. I think it's dangerous to human dignity, and it will turbocharge attacks on the unborn and a theory, a complete kind of takeover, I think, of a throwaway culture within healthcare, such that nations, the will of the people of those nation states and their proper understanding of human dignity will be disregarded and overturned in favor of a theory of those international institutions that is anti-science, that completely is anti the chemical and biological realities of human life, that disregards religious freedom and medical conscience, and that overturns the healthcare system from being one about being one about the alleviation of suffering to one about one all rehabilitation. There's an amazing article he published it in 1949. He was a consultant to the U.S. Army and the war crimes in Nuremberg. It's called Medical Science Under Dictatorship. It's one of the most important articles on the culture of life and the culture of death over the last 100 years. I'm convinced of that. And so that's the problem with international institutions, is that too many of them have a viewpoint that is totally hostile to human dignity and the right to life, and can undermine those movements of a culture of life in various nation states. And if nation states lose their sovereignty, it will only get worse. So that's my biggest concern.
Excellent. Ms. Foster, same question.
Yeah, really good points, Louis. First of all, the U.S. and other major bodies, including the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and others, they really play this role of bullying member nations. They argue that abortion is an aspect of women's health care, of human rights. And in fact, we see that with sexual and reproductive health and rights language, that phrase that we see throughout the international bodies nowadays. They say that international conventions of human rights or ordinary treaty obligations oblige member states to support abortion. That's a position that is totally false, because there is no international treaty language affirming a right to abortion. And in fact, the notion is directly contrary to the positions of dozens of nations, including the 23 that signed that American Convention on Human Rights, the 33 that signed the Geneva Declaration. I've written pretty extensively on this, articles. Our organization, Americans United for Life, has published articles on this, specifically rebutting that that misguided notion that there is any kind of international right to abortion. The only real exception there is the Maputo Protocol, signed in Maputo, Mozambique in 2003, and that did try to claim a right to abortion, but that was regional specific. And I have also written pretty extensively on that and explaining what exactly that did, how it came about. Happy to share that work with any of the students who are interested, because it's another one of those sources that's being cited to try to expand abortion when it really should not be. But it really is aggressive activism, and that's why we call it abortion colonialism. We're trying to export it, claiming that we know what is best for the developing world, that we have all the answers to cure what ails, whether it's poverty or war or no matter what it is. And somehow abortion always seems to find its way in and be a part of that, especially in Latin American and Caribbean countries in recent years. The international human rights bodies have repeatedly urged nations to decriminalize and provide expanded access to abortion, notwithstanding the American Convention's recognition of a state duty to protect prenatal life. The UN treaty bodies, they have repeatedly told Latin American and Caribbean states that international human rights treaties require the creation of abortion rights, and that legally authorizing abortion would reduce maternal mortality rates in the region. This is completely false, as the experience of Chile proves, a country that had fully banned abortion for over 100 years. And until 2017, they had the lowest maternal mortality rate in Latin America. The US, on the other hand, has the highest maternal mortality rate in the developed world, even though abortion on demand has been available since Roe v. Wade in 1973 swept away state laws in all 50 states and made abortion on demand accessible for all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason at all. So in terms of global health, the international bodies are prioritizing access to abortion. The World Health Organization, the UN, all of the major international bodies there, and they do this despite the fact that both surgical and chemical abortion pose direct threats to women's health and safety, and that's especially true in rural areas of underdeveloped nations. In a word, at many places where abortion is being promoted as essential to women's health, the lack of access to emergency services and the lack of basic hygiene needs such as clean water and antiseptics, those are the real threat to women's health. And I also just want to share this study that I found, it's probably been 10 plus years ago. It is not getting the reception, the amplification that it needs, because this study found that that the one-time use only manual vacuum aspiration kits, so abortion kits to provide manual vacuum aspiration abortions, they were produced for one use only. They are made of plastic. They are not able of being sterilized. It is not safe to reuse it. And yet, in parts of Africa, at least, that was where the study focused, these one-time use only manual vacuum aspiration kits were being reused. And so, in fact, we're contributing to the spread of HIV and AIDS among women's communities and then throughout the communities. That kind of abortion promotion to the detriment of hygiene, of disease care, of basic medical procedures is absolutely appalling, and yet all too often it's what we see.
Yeah, and I'd love to add on to that too. What Catherine just says is that, and at least some of these countries and in some of these policies, there's a greater focus on providing abortion than on ensuring and providing for greater health outcomes, longer life for the citizens of that country. And it shows what it's really about. So much of what we're seeing in global health is based on two lies. Number one, the lie that is clearly not true, and the research, the projections just show it, is that the world's overpopulated. We don't have enough resources. That's a big fat lie. Not even close to. It's not a controversy. we don't have a problem of overpopulation. And even if we did, abortion's not the answer. That's number one. Number two, there's this lie that as well, that certain people or certain people and their unborn children are undesirable if they're poor, if they're uneducated, if they hail from a certain country, if they're already reproducing higher than perhaps that we'd like based on some arbitrary standard, that we need to get rid of these people. Those things are incredible lies that reek of eugenics, that reek of racism, that reek of a social Darwinism that violates the very core of human dignity, human rights, and civil rights. And it's vitally important that we educate young people about that right now. And we push for those policies that push against it. And we take the good that we receive from public health institutions, but throw out the bad. And that's vital.
That's right. And I would also say that, again, there's this idea that, that some would espouse that the US or that global institutions have all the answers, when we have not gotten our act together here. You look at our own resource, again, government inspectors going into abortion facilities and just tracking what the situation is there. And when you look at those inspections and you really analyze, are these facilities sanitary by any stretch of the imagination? All too frequently, the answer is no. In our resource, Unsafe, it's available at our website, aul.org, you can see just appalling, dirty, dangerous conditions. We're talking about drugs being stored in the same fridge as employee lunches, in the same fridge as fetal remains. We're talking about blood and other fluids and other biologics just all over examination tables, surgical tables, on floors. The situation is absolutely disgusting. There was one facility in particular I'm thinking of, and this one always gets me. They were using the same sponge to sterilize instruments for a week straight without cleaning the sponge. So nothing's really getting sterilized. That's the tip of the iceberg. Just horrible, horrifying conditions. We don't have the answers ourselves. And so what we need to be doing is expanding our global community, expanding the sphere of influence, welcoming in voices and learning from each other, because we don't have all the answers. And to assume that we do and to export abortion as a moral good and as a health good is simply wrong-headed.
Excellent. Excellent. I just wanted to briefly insert to the audience that the next question will be the last predetermined question. So if you have a question, your own question, please utilize the Q&A function. You can either submit anonymously or with your name attached, and I will then read your questions to Lewis Brown and Catherine Glenn Foster, so that we can get a little bit more of what the audience wants to hear from you too. And so my last question, we'll start with Catherine on this one, regards something that you talked about earlier, the Mexico City policy. It's a significant issue for the pro-life community. It's a large concern since the early days of the Biden administration. President Biden rescinded in January 2021 our involvement with the Mexico City policy, also known as the global gag rule. So my question for you is, what is the significance of this policy, Biden's revocation of it, and its development's expected consequences?
Yeah, for too long, abortion advocates have profited from taxpayer-funded programs masquerading as providing full-service medical care. When the prior administration expanded the Mexico City policy, that meant that our taxpayer dollars would be used to promote good health and life instead of abortion. And that's something that that I think everyone should be able to get behind, because when we're investing in full service comprehensive medical care, which we believe in, we want good health outcomes, we want to improve health outcomes across the board in the US, where we already see disparities in health outcomes that we need to address, and around the globe. By investing in that instead of abortion, that is the best use of our limited taxpayer dollars. And it's a better way to help women. It's a better way to help children, both born and unborn, and the global community. So I was extremely disappointed when President Biden did rescind that policy, because it provided that for non-governmental organizations to be eligible to receive federal funding, they just had to not perform or actively promote abortion as a method of family planning. They could still provide all the other family planning resources, information. We've seen this policy go back and forth. Every Democrat president has rescinded it. Every Republican president has continued or reinstated it. And so it has been politicized, but this is an issue that every American should be able to get behind. And in fact, most Americans do. 80+% of Americans oppose using our taxpayer dollars to fund abortions, even in America, much less overseas, where it starts to look a little bit more even than in America, like eugenics, a little bit more like we are exporting abortion as a means of tying foreign aid or other programs. But instead, we are now again contributing to these separate non-governmental organizations that are performing or actively promoting abortion as a method of family planning. So it's really concerning. I would just add, though, that I still do see tremendous hope globally for reaffirming the cultural and the political commitment to the right to life among our partners in Latin America and in Africa and elsewhere. We've seen the emergence of the Geneva Declaration and the increasingly unified bloc of pro-life countries that are speaking out against the abortion colonialism empire that's been established. We see the affirmations of nations in old Europe like Poland and Lithuania of the right to life and in their legislation and in their court rulings. And we continue to see resistance by African countries like Kenya and Latin American countries like Paraguay and Honduras and El Salvador and Uruguay, opposition and resistance to normalizing abortion. So the key is just to support those unification efforts by pushing back against the bullies, and especially now that the State Department is going to be promoting abortion over the next 4 years. So our best opportunities are in OAS and the African states, the countries that are seeking to make it clear that respect for life, not abortion colonialism, should be the norm internationally. That is what is in our international treaties and foreign laws across the globe. And we should not use our bully pulpit to try to change that, to try to change the moral framework of a nation.
Excellent. Excellent. We're now going to move on to some of our audience questions. Some of the questions I'm going to try to pair up if they're similar enough. So we have one anonymous attendee that says, when a country has abortion laws that are generally pro-choice, but do not have a culture of robust religious freedoms or protections for religious freedoms that are usually cited as a defense for doctors refusing to perform abortions, what can doctors who are pro-life do, especially with an administration that's pro-choice? And similarly, from Tom Palmer, he says, both of you are very courageous. And he says that almost all his female friends emphasize the importance of a woman's choice, sometimes considering it a human right. So he's wondering how you would address this. So for doctors who are pro-life, for people who are pro-life, talking to their pro-choice friends, how do they respond in these circumstances? We'll start with Lewis on this one.
Matteo, if possible, I'd love to defer to Catherine first here, and then I'm happy to go, but I think out of respect,
Thank you, Lewis. I'm happy to go first here. First of all, let's talk about the friends, because that is an issue that hits close to home for me, because I am post-abortive myself. For me, abortion was not an issue that I really heard about, thought about. I had a couple of friends when I was a kid who claimed to be pro-life, a couple of classmates who said that they were pro-choice, and that was all I knew. I had never heard the term abortion in my life until I was 19 years old and found out that I was myself pregnant. Didn't know where to turn, Googled, and the first things that came up were abortion facilities. So I thought, okay, I may get an abortion. I don't know yet. I'm scared. I'm alone. I'm afraid of telling my mom. She was a single mom. What do I do? So I made an appointment for that Saturday. I went in those doors, and from that point forward, nothing restored my agency, my choice. I felt like I had no choice. And in the end, I had no choice, because they perform the ultrasound as they have to. They have to figure out how far along you are, what procedure to do, make sure it's not ectopic, and figure out how much to charge you. I asked to see the ultrasound. They said no. I didn't get information. I asked questions. I didn't get answers. And when finally I changed my mind, because I said, you know what? I just don't feel right about this. I would not have said I was pro-life at that point. I had no idea. Don't know that I hadn't thought about it. I don't know that I really cared. It wasn't internalized for me. But when I said, I'll just get up and go, keep the money, don't care that much, just let me out. I'll figure out what to do. I'll find a way to call my mom and break the news to her that she was a grandmom. And that would be that. And instead of respecting my agency, my choice, my free will, they came and held me down and forcibly aborted my child. That trauma rippled through my life for years. That brought me to where I am today. I wouldn't be doing this. This is not, I would say, my dream career. It's wonderful. I love it. I'm grateful for it, but that's why I'm here. So, for a lot of people, it's the default answer because everyone wants to be pro-choice. I like that term, choice. I like autonomy. I like to choose what I want. But some choices are at their core morally wrong. A choice that takes away someone else's life, someone else's choice, becomes a problem. And so I just think we need to talk about this issue. For decades, it has been swept under the rug. It's been the thing we don't speak of. So I tell everyone, I know it's weird. I tell everyone every chance I get that I had an abortion and that I'm pro-life, and I share the facts about abortion and abortion law, because that's how we normalize the discussion and open up the doors to the women who have had negative experiences. So it isn't just about choice. So it's about the reality. So it's about the information that we aren't getting, that the abortion industry is trying to hide from us. They're fighting against every single protective pro-life law, not just the ones that would put them out of business or, ban abortions, but they're fighting against every law that would in any way impact them, other than just complete expansion and wiping away all laws. That's not okay. That's, we should be able to build coalitions and build bridges to affect positive health outcomes for women. So, I would love to sit down and spend time with anyone who says that they're pro-choice. No judgment, no, just to sit down and share stories and learn from them and have a conversation, because I think that is how we make a difference. So the more we talk about it, the more we share, the better. I know I'm going a little long on this question, but doctors who are pro-life, whether you're a doctor and you have a pretty liberal country when it comes to abortion law, and you don't have robust religious freedom protections, it's hard. You have to stand your ground, do what you feel is morally right, whether for religious reasons or moral reasons or whatever it may be. But it's going to take a lot of agitation. It's going to take a lot of demonstration, a lot of effort in the legislatures and the courts, and turning to those international documents that do guarantee religious freedoms. So it's difficult. It's a long journey, and there are many of us who are willing to stand alongside you as you fight that fight.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just amazing. Catherine's courage and heroism is extraordinary. I think as I think about these things, I think about the reality of love, truth, and freedom. When we think about abortion, it's a denial of the truth of the scientific and biological realities of the unborn child that's there from the first moment of conception. and it's only more obvious and evident scientifically and biologically, which each moment that that child continues to live. I think of the reality that abortion is a deprivation of love for the mother and for the unborn child and for the father. I think of the reality that abortion is a grave violation of the dignity of the child and the mother. And I think about how the origins of abortion and you know, everything that Margaret Sanger represented came out of a desire of really a racist desire to throw away, get rid of, abort the undesirables. That's the reality. And women and unborn children and their fathers deserve love. They deserve truth, and they deserve dignity. If we don't have love, truth, and dignity, we have chaos, disorder, and death. And that is the choice that we have. And so whether one approaches this issue from a issue of ethics, whether one approaches it from a perspective of philosophy, or whether one approaches it from the perspective of science, there's certain truths and realities that we can't change. And Catherine talked powerfully about the reality of the ultrasound. There's a reason why it's so powerful, because it's a truth you can't deny. And too often, particularly over the last 100 plus years, when someone becomes inconvenient, when someone becomes weak, when someone becomes vulnerable, whether it's the African American in too much of the 19th and 20th century, whether it is other marginalized populations throughout much of the 20th and even still in parts of the 21st century. We think of the certain populations in China right now, or whether we think about the unborn. The way that the aggressor that is trying to stamp out dignity and stamp out life proceeds is to erase them, is to stamp them out. As a valiant person that I met years ago gave an amazing presentation, he talked about how there will be an effort in getting rid of a population or getting rid of an undesirable people, so-called undesirable. You just make them disappear. And so however we get there, whether it's through philosophy, through science, through just moral convictions, or through our religious faith, which I would invite everyone here at Georgetown, being a Catholic university, to embrace the Judeo-Christian worldview. We know that abortion is denial of love, it's denial of truth, and it's denial of dignity. And so we have to proceed forward in love, forward in truth, forward in dignity. And just be unwavering and courageous in that. Unwavering and courageous. When it comes to the conscience issue, it's highly important that as we strive to create a culture of life, as we strive to pass pro-life laws locally at the state level, at the national level, and seek to inculcate that into international law and various aspects of international law. We also have to pair that with a valiant and comprehensive defense of the right of conscience and religious convictions, the right of conscience and religious freedom, particularly medical conscience. It's absolutely vital. If a physician, a medical professional, is able to provide care consistent with their moral and religious and ethical convictions, consistent with what they believe is the best judgment of their patient, generally speaking, I believe at the end of the day and over time, the patient is more likely to get the best care possible. But when those convictions, those moral, religious, ethical convictions are undermined, it is absolutely crushing to pro-life healthcare. The reality of the witness of pro-life care must go side by side with the political and legal realities that we are striving to face. And so as we seek pro-life laws and policies, particularly at the national level and various nation states, we also have to seek to protect conscience so that that witness, the beautiful witness of that pro-life care, the love in fact and reality for the unborn and their mothers can be shown. Those two things must go hand in hand, and conscience and religious freedom is vital to allowing that to happen. Excellent.
Thank you so much. I apologize to the rest of the audience. There are many questions. We will not be able to get through all of them today. We're going to end with just one more question, but before I give it, I just wanted to thank both of you so much for sharing your experience and for the work that you do. It's really important, and you're fighting a good fight. My last question, in order to have somewhat of a positive end to some of the things that we're talking about, what is the good news? We've heard a lot of frustrating trends for pro-life thinkers and pro-life advocates, both nationally and abroad. What is going the right direction?
I'll go. And I'm going to get a little bit spiritual because I think it's challenging to, when we look at just the temporal realities, they're very challenging. I think of two things. And I'm going to expand on a wonderful talk. There's an amazing priest, Father Matthias Thelen, out of the state of Michigan. And he leads a wonderful ministry called Encounter Ministries. And he was on a conference that was done with Renewal Ministries there. Some amazing theological scholars and speakers out of Renewal Ministries. And I found extraordinary hope in what he articulated. And I'll extend on it. I think truth is being uncovered, right? The reality of the evil in our world is more obvious than it was a year ago. And it's only, it's troubling, but it's only getting more obvious. And I think that the advance of freedom, the advance of dignity requires a sobering assessment of what we're in. We need to understand what we truly face. And I think for a lot of people, that's more clear. And so that clarity and the unveiling of truth, I'm even thinking of a friend of mine that used to work at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, talked about this 2 years ago, the unveiling of truth. That allows us to understand the moment that we're in and to move forward. And I'm going to just say that, in the power of the Holy Spirit, right? I think secondly, for all of us, whether we're on this call and we're pro-life because of the sense of the transcendent that the Greek philosophers talked about, that there's something beyond us that we're called to, that galvanizes us to protect rights and dignity, or we're pro-life because we have a more powerful sense of God and we're Christians or even Catholic. We have been forced by the deprivations of the last year to be detached from the temporal realities of this world and to admit our limitations. And even thinking about what Father Matthias said in that talk that I watched, and we say, when we cry before the Lord and say that we are powerless, but you are all powerful, things move, things change, advancements are made, death is turned into life. Cardinal Dolan talked about this in the midst of the pandemic. He said and it's appropriate as we go through this Lent, to get to Easter Sunday, you got to go through Good Friday. And the suffering of the crucifixion makes the glory of the resurrection that much greater. So as much as sin and evil seems to be growing, grace is growing even more. And God is setting up to do, he is doing and setting up to do even more extraordinary things than he's already doing. And I always believe that there's cause for hope because God rose, and that the best is truly yet to come. And that is what we have to look forward to. And that's really all I can cling to with as challenging as things have been the last 12 months. So I'll end with that on my end.
Catherine, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah.
What are the positive trends?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you to all of the students who joined. Thank you to Mateo. Thank you, Louis. Your comments there are just so incredibly powerful and inspirational. I just truly appreciate you and all that you are doing to advance a culture of life holistically. Thank you to the groups that invited us both. And thank you to the students that asked questions. They are fantastic questions. I wish we could hit on all of them. We don't have time. I am going to incorporate one into my answer here, and it's from an anonymous attendee who says that our points are targeting on how abortions are conducted. So what would happen if abortions in these countries, whether it's, I assume, the US or globally, can be done in a safe, sanitary, cheap, and non-forcing way for women? Would you still object to the international laws that support abortion? That is a really good question. And would I still object? Absolutely. I am fully, unapologetically pro-life, from fertilization to natural death. Every moment in between. I believe in support. I believe in holistic care. I believe in radical care for women, and when necessary, overhauling entire systems to make sure that we're getting it, to make sure that we are getting equitable health outcomes, because that's something that tragically does not often happen in the US or in nations around the world. So that is my position. But for now, in those countries where it is legal, I do believe that every effort should be made to protect women who do access abortion. I've been there, I've walked in their shoes, and just looking back, thinking back to last year and the June medical case out of Louisiana that we were heavily involved in, looking back at that case that really centered on that emergency transfer agreement, so that when something goes wrong during an abortion, as it sometimes does, that's not deniable, what happens next? Does the woman get bundled into hopefully an ambulance, sometimes the backseat of a car, taken to the ER, dropped off there, and then left to wait for potentially hours to get into an OR? Or does the physician have admitting privileges so that she can move directly into an OR so that the doctor has every possible chance to save her life? Now, overall, the decision was not the loss that it was initially made out to be. It was a complicated decision, but the bottom line is that the law in Louisiana that provided that was passed by pro-life Democrat women who know their community, who knew what was needed, and who had women's health care in mind, that law was struck down. And it felt like a slap in the face to me and to women like me who have gotten an abortion, as if to say that there's going to be yet another legal loophole, a carve out for abortion that says that abortion is a different type of procedure and doesn't align with all of the other similar procedures where you do have to have an emergency transfer agreement, that women are somehow less. That is offensive. The Supreme Court's idea that women rely on abortion to succeed is offensive, because if that's true, then we've got a lot of work to do in our nation's law and policy and in the hearts and minds of the people. But I would say that more and more we are seeing people come alongside us. We are seeing people who recognize that women deserve better, that women deserve more, that women do deserve care and support from the government and from institutions, that partners need that children need that. And that is the way that we can bring all of us up, all of us, to an equitable outcome. We're not there, and it's a lot of work. But more and more we see people opposing radical abortion policy, the funding, the late term abortion, when it's so much more dangerous for the mother, 91 times more likely for the mother to die during an abortion at 21 weeks or on than if it had been performed in the first trimester, and when the child is viable outside the womb. We're talking about common sense policies that the supermajority of Americans agree on. That gives me hope. It gives me hope that we have nations leading the way around the world, leading the US, trying to share their hearts and their morality of their nations, our partners in Latin America and in Africa and elsewhere, that are reaffirming that cultural and political commitment to the right to life, with institutions and documents like the Geneva Declaration, and the nations in Europe speaking out on the right to life and in their laws and in their courts, and those nations that are fighting back against abortion colonialism. And so we are unifying, we are fighting back, we are supporting life at every moment, again, from conception to death, because it is about bringing us all up and not abandoning people once they're born, not abandoning people because we don't like the situation that they're born into because of the country or because of their income level or the type of housing they have. We all deserve a chance to live and to thrive, and we need the supports that are available in our modern society to get there. It's time to rethink how we're providing aid and rethink how we're supporting women and partners and children, and that is how we will all thrive globally.
All right. Thank you so much to both of you. We're going to finish it off with Dennis, who's going to close us out.
Yeah. As Mateo said, thank you so much for coming tonight. It's truly an honor to have you both. And thank you to Mateo for moderating and to RTL for co-sponsoring this event. And I just want to say I can't imagine how difficult it can be to discuss such an emotional and very often personal topic, especially since it appears that abortion is spreading, across the world to an extent to which I didn't realize until tonight. So with that, I wish you all a good night, or maybe even good morning, wherever you're zooming from.